What would you do if you saw a child in danger, and the only thing standing between them and harm was your courage? When Leon Hayes, a hard-working father, hears a cry for help, he risks everything to stop a horrifying crime, unleashing a series of events that will test his strength, love, and resolve. How far would you go to protect an innocent life? Stay with us to uncover this heart-stopping story of bravery and redemption. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. The streets of Winston-Salem stirred with the quiet hum of early morning life. Leon Hayes adjusted the straps of his worn backpack as he walked briskly down the cracked sidewalk. The air was cool, with just enough bite to remind him that winter was creeping closer. His steel-toed boots scuffed against the pavement, a sound that matched the rhythm of his thoughts, fast, restless, and heavy. He glanced at his watch. 7:48 a.m. Late. Again. Leon cursed under his breath. He'd promised himself he wouldn't let this happen. Not today. Earl Whitaker, his boss at the distribution warehouse, wasn't the forgiving type. 2 late arrivals in a single month had already cost him overtime hours he couldn't afford to lose. Between rent, groceries, and Maya's mounting medical bills, there was no room for error. He adjusted his pace, his long strides eating up the distance toward the industrial area. His mind drifted briefly to Maya, his 8-year-old daughter. Her smile was a rare treasure these days, often eclipsed by the pale exhaustion in her face. Last night had been another tough one. Sleepless hours spent at her bedside in the hospital, watching her fight a fever that refused to break. A distant rumble pulled Leon from his thoughts. He frowned. The streets were unusually quiet for a Monday morning, save for the sound of a garbage truck somewhere down the block. No rush of cars, no hurried footsteps, just silence. That was when he heard it. The sound was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves caught in the wind. Then it came again, clearer this time. A cry. Small, desperate. "Help!" Leon stopped mid-stride, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned his head toward the noise, ears straining. Another cry followed, more frantic than the last. "Let me go!" The voice belonged to a child, a boy. Leon's feet rooted to the ground as his mind waged war with his instincts. "Keep walking," he told himself. "You can't be late again." But his conscience argued louder, the sound of the boy's pleas slicing through his resolve like a blade. "Somebody, help!" Leon swore under his breath and spun toward the sound. He followed the cries, his pulse quickening with every step. They led him to a narrow alley tucked between 2 abandoned storefronts. The sight that greeted him made his stomach churn. 2 men, both large and dressed in dark clothing, were dragging a small boy toward a black van parked at the end of the alley. The child, no older than 7 or 8, kicked and thrashed in their grasp, his blonde hair wild and his face streaked with tears. "Let me go!" the boy shrieked, his voice breaking. Leon's gaze darted around the empty street. No witnesses, no backup, just him. He clenched his fists. Fear clawed at his chest, urging him to walk away. These men were dangerous. He could see it in the way they moved, deliberate and unyielding. But then he thought of Maya, and how he'd want someone to act if it were her. "Hey!" Leon's voice rang out, louder than he expected. The men froze, their heads snapping toward him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Leon demanded, stepping into the alley. The taller man, lean and wiry, with a scar running down his cheek, sneered. "Mind your business." The shorter one smirked. "Yeah, walk away, pal. This ain't got nothing to do with you." Leon's eyes flicked to the boy, who was staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You let him go, now." Leon's voice was steady, but his heart pounded like a drum. The shorter man chuckled, shaking his head. "And what are you going to do about it, huh? Take both of us on? Be my guest." Leon's mind raced. He spotted a wooden plank leaning against a dumpster a few feet away. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, gripping the rough wood tightly in his hands. "You want to find out?" Leon challenged, his voice low and dangerous. The taller man hesitated, glancing nervously toward the street. "Come on, man, let's go." "No way," the shorter one snapped. "He's bluffing." Leon raised the plank and swung it against the dumpster with a resounding clang. The noise echoed through the alley like a gunshot. The reaction was immediate. The taller man released the boy's arm, muttering a curse under his breath. The shorter one hesitated, his confidence wavering. "Let's go," the taller man barked, shoving his partner toward the van. The men bolted, disappearing down the alley. The van screeched to life moments later, its tires squealing as it sped away. Leon lowered the plank, his chest heaving. His eyes darted between the boy and the now empty alley. When he was sure the men were gone, he dropped the makeshift weapon and crouched down. "Hey, kid," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "You okay?" The boy was huddled against the wall, his knees pulled to his chest. He trembled but didn't speak. "My name's Leon," he continued. "What's yours?" The boy's lips quivered. "Noah," he stammered. "All right, Noah," Leon said softly. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you." Noah sniffled and nodded, though his small hands still shook. "Come on," Leon said, holding out his hand. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Noah hesitated for a moment before slipping his hand into Leon's. It was small, fragile, so much like Maya's. Leon gave the boy a reassuring smile, though his mind was already racing. He had no idea what he'd just stepped into, but one thing was certain. Life as he knew it was about to change. The tremble in Noah's small hand lingered in Leon's grip as they emerged from the alley. The air outside felt colder now, a stark contrast to the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Leon's mind replayed the encounter like a broken tape, each detail sharper and more unsettling. The fear in Noah's eyes was something he couldn't shake. He glanced down at the boy. "You doing okay, Noah?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Noah didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the ground, his lips pressed tightly together. Leon sighed. The kid had been through hell, and the last thing he needed was pressure. As they walked, Leon scanned the empty street. No signs of the van, no shadowy figures lurking nearby. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They needed to move quickly. The police station wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but every step felt heavier than the last. When the fluorescent glow of the station sign came into view, Leon felt a small wave of relief. He squeezed Noah's hand gently. "We're here," he said, hoping to sound reassuring. The station door creaked as Leon pushed it open, leading Noah inside. The stark contrast of the warm air and buzzing fluorescent lights made the room feel oddly surreal. A handful of officers moved about, chatting or buried in paperwork. Behind the front desk stood a man with salt and pepper hair and a badge that gleamed under the lights. He looked up, his brow furrowing as he took in the sight of Leon and Noah. "Can I help you?" the officer asked, his tone neutral but laced with curiosity. Leon took a step closer, keeping Noah close. "This boy," he began, his words tumbling out quickly. "His name's Noah. I found him in an alley. 2 men were trying to grab him, drag him into a van." The officer's demeanor shifted immediately. His eyes sharpened, and his hand moved instinctively toward a notepad. "2 men? Kidnapping. Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze darting to Noah, whose small frame was practically hidden behind Leon. "No, we're fine," Leon said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. "But those men, they're still out there." The officer motioned toward a younger woman in uniform standing nearby. She approached with purposeful strides, her expression both professional and kind. "Officer Morales," she introduced herself, crouching slightly to meet Noah's eye level. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Kelly. You're safe now, okay?" Noah didn't respond, his small hands clutching Leon's jacket tightly. Morales offered a reassuring smile before straightening. "Why don't you come with me?" she said, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the room. Leon hesitated for a moment but followed her lead. Morales guided them to a set of chairs, kneeling beside Noah. Her tone softened further. "Can you tell me your full name, honey?" Noah glanced at Leon as if seeking permission. Leon nodded gently. "It's okay," he said. "She's here to help." "Noah Sanders," the boy mumbled, barely above a whisper. His voice cracked, but Morales didn't rush him. "Good job, Noah," she said warmly. "Do you know where your parents are?" He shook his head, his lip quivering again. Morales glanced at Leon. "And you found him in an alley? What happened exactly?" Leon recounted the encounter, his voice measured but urgent. He described the 2 men in detail, the scar on one's cheek, the shaved head of the other, the black van with no plates. Morales jotted down every word, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. This isn't the first time we've had reports like this, she admitted, her tone grim. But it's the first time anyone intervened. You probably saved this boy's life. Leon shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the weight of her words. I couldn't walk away. Morales studied him for a moment before nodding. Well, you did the right thing. Not everyone would have. She turned to Noah. We're going to call your parents, okay? They must be so worried. Noah nodded slowly, his tiny shoulders relaxing for the first time since they'd arrived. Morales stood and gestured for another officer to take over. Can you stay here a little longer? She asked Leon. We'll need your full statement and there's some paperwork to file. Leon checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. Late wasn't even the word for it now. Earl would have his head for this. But as he looked at Noah, who was now sipping water from a paper cup, his decision felt as clear as ever. Yeah, Leon said quietly. I can stay. Morales offered him a faint smile, one that carried a mix of gratitude and respect. Thank you. As she walked away, Leon leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His mind drifted to Maya. What if it had been her? What if someone like him hadn't been there to step in? The thought was too heavy to hold for long, but it left an undeniable resolve in its wake. No matter the cost, he knew he'd made the right choice. Leon pushed through the precinct doors, stepping into the crisp morning air. The tension of the past hour clung to him like a heavy coat, but the sight of Noah being comforted by Officer Morales lingered in his mind. The boy was safe. That should have been enough. Yet, as Leon made his way down the quiet streets toward work, a gnawing unease crept in. The men who had tried to take Noah were still out there, and they'd seen his face. By the time he reached the warehouse, the noise of forklifts and shouted instructions already filled the air. Leon glanced at his watch. 9:04 a.m. Earl Whitaker, his boss, would be waiting. Leon's steps slowed, dread coiling in his stomach. Earl wasn't known for second chances, and Leon had already spent most of the month trying to make up for Maya's medical absences. He wiped his palms on his jeans and steeled himself before stepping inside. The warehouse was alive with movement. Workers loaded crates and forklifts zipped through the aisles like clockwork, but one voice cut through the noise like a knife. Hayes! Earl's bark echoed across the space. Leon stopped, his shoulders tightening as the man stormed toward him. Earl Whitaker was a tall, broad-shouldered figure, his perpetually furrowed brow and clipboard a permanent part of his presence. Where the hell have you been? Earl demanded, his tone sharp enough to make nearby workers pause. Do you even know what time it is? Leon swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. I know I'm late, Earl, but no buts, Earl interrupted, jabbing his clipboard toward Leon. You think you're special? You think your excuses mean a damn thing to me? This isn't a charity, Hayes. It's a business, and when you're not here, other people pick up the slack. Leon's jaw tightened, but he bit back a retort. I wasn't making excuses. I helped a kid this morning. He was… Stop, Earl said, holding up a hand. I don't care if you saved the president himself. Rules are rules. You clock in at 8 or you don't clock in at all. Leon glanced around, feeling the eyes of his co-workers on him. Most were either smirking or looking away, unwilling to meet his gaze. He caught sight of Tommy Grant leaning against a pallet, a smug grin on his face. Look, Earl, Leon tried again. I'm just asking for a little understanding. This wasn't understanding? Earl barked a humorless laugh. You want understanding? Then understand this. You're losing an hour's pay, and next time you're out. Leon clenched his fists at his sides but forced himself to nod. Fine. Earl shook his head in disgust and turned away, muttering under his breath, Get back to work, Hayes, and try not to waste anyone else's time. Leon exhaled slowly, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He walked to the loading dock, grabbing his gloves and clipboard. As he started stacking boxes, he felt the heat of Tommy's gaze. Rough morning, huh? Tommy said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. You sure are good at making an impression, Hayes. Too bad it's always the wrong one. Leon ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. But Tommy wasn't done. You know, some of us actually show up on time. Maybe that's why Earl listens to me. Leon paused, gripping the edge of the pallet. He turned slowly, fixing Tommy with a steady gaze. You got something to say, Tommy? Tommy smirked, shrugging. Just saying. Some people should stick to what they're good at, whatever that is. Leon stared at him for a moment longer, then turned back to his work. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not here, not now. The hours dragged by, the weight of Earl's reprimand hanging heavy over Leon. His thoughts drifted to Maya, her small hand clutching his as he promised her things would get better. He glanced at his phone during a break, half hoping for a message from Officer Morales with an update on the kidnappers. Nothing. By the end of his shift, Leon's body ached from the physical labor, but his mind was even more exhausted. As he stepped outside, the cool evening air washed over him. He looked toward the hospital, a familiar pull tugging at him. He couldn't go home yet. Maya needed him, and that was all that mattered. The hospital was quiet when Leon arrived. He stepped into Maya's room, his heart lifting slightly at the sight of her sitting up, her cheeks a little rosier than they had been that morning. Daddy! Maya's voice was small but filled with excitement. She reached for him and he crossed the room quickly, scooping her into a gentle hug. How's my girl? He asked, kissing her forehead. I'm okay, she said with a smile. The nurse said I was really brave today. Leon chuckled, sitting beside her bed. Well, you've got me beat. I wasn't feeling so brave this morning. Maya tilted her head. Why not? Leon hesitated, then told her about Noah. He softened the details, focusing on the boy's safety rather than the danger. You saved him? Maya asked, her eyes wide. Leon nodded. I couldn't just walk away. Sometimes you have to do what's right, even if it's hard. Maya smiled, her small hand reaching for his. That's why you're my hero, Daddy. Leon blinked back the sting in his eyes and squeezed her hand. You're mine too, Peanut. As Maya drifted off to sleep, Leon sat back, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. No matter how hard the day had been, this, being here for her, made it all worth it. Leon sat in the quiet of Maya's hospital room, her breathing soft and steady as she slept. The weight of the day hung heavy on him. Earl's harsh words, Tommy's smirking taunts, and the lingering image of Noah clutching his hand at the police station. Leon knew he'd done the right thing, but the cost felt higher than he'd expected. He squeezed Maya's tiny hand in his and whispered, As long as you're safe, it's all worth it. The knock on the door came just as Leon was about to leave. He frowned, glancing at the clock. Visitors this late? He opened the door cautiously and was met by a man and a woman, both dressed neatly but with an air of nervousness about them. The man extended a hand, his smile warm but hesitant. Leon Hayes? The man asked. Yeah, Leon replied, his brow furrowing. Who's asking? I'm Elliot Parker, the man said, shaking Leon's hand firmly. And this is my wife, Rachel. We're Noah's parents. Leon's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, come in. The Parkers stepped inside, their movements careful as if afraid to intrude. Rachel's gaze immediately swept to the bed where Maya lay sleeping. Her hand flew to her chest. She's beautiful, she whispered. Thank you, Leon said, his voice cautious but polite. He gestured toward the small table in the corner, and they sat down together. How's Noah doing? Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. He's doing well, thanks to you. He hasn't stopped talking about you since we got him home. He says you're his hero. Leon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I just did what anyone would have done. Elliot shook his head, his expression earnest. No, you didn't. Most people would have kept walking. What you did, risking yourself like that, you saved our son. Rachel and I, we can't even begin to thank you. Leon glanced down at his hands, unsure of how to respond. Gratitude like this felt foreign, almost overwhelming. I'm just glad he's safe, he said finally. That's all that matters. There was a brief silence before Rachel spoke again, her voice softer now. We heard about Maya, she said, glancing toward the bed. Noah told us about how you talked about her, how much she means to you. Leon's chest tightened. She's my whole world, he admitted. She's been fighting leukemia for 2 years now. It's been hard. Rachel reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. We'd like to help, she said. Please let us help. Leon froze, his instinctive pride flaring. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully. But we're managing. It's not charity, Elliot interrupted, his tone firm but kind. It's gratitude. You saved our family, Leon. Let us give you the chance to make things a little easier for yours. Leon hesitated, his thoughts racing. The idea of accepting help, even from people as genuine as the Parkers, felt like admitting he couldn't do it on his own. But then he thought of Maya, the sleepless nights, the mounting bills, the fear that never left his chest. This wasn't about his pride. It was about her. What kind of help are we talking about? He asked finally. Elliot's expression brightened slightly. I own a logistics company, Parker Logistics. We've got an opening in our operations department. Better pay, more predictable hours. It's nothing fancy, but it's honest work, and I think you'd be a good fit. Leon blinked, caught off guard. You're offering me a job? Rachel nodded. And anything Maya needs, specialists, treatments, whatever it takes, we'll cover it. Leon stared at them, his throat tight. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Elliot said simply. For her. Leon's gaze shifted to Maya, her tiny form curled under the blanket. He thought of the apartment with its creaky pipes and peeling paint, the stress of juggling overtime shifts and hospital visits. This could be the break they needed, a chance to give Maya the life she deserved. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. For her. Thank you. Rachel's eyes glistened with tears as she smiled. Elliot reached out, shaking Leon's hand firmly. You're a good man, Leon, he said, and we're going to make sure you and Maya get the fresh start you deserve. As the Parkers stood to leave, Rachel paused, glancing back at Leon. Noah wanted us to tell you something, she said. He said, tell Mr. Hayes he's my superhero. Leon felt his chest tighten, a lump forming in his throat. He managed a small smile. Tell Noah. He's mine too. The Parkers left quietly, their gratitude lingering in the room like a warm embrace. Leon sat back in his chair, staring at Maya as she slept. For the first time in a long while, hope felt like more than just a word. It felt real. The quiet hum of the hospital room was interrupted by the soft scrape of a chair as Leon sat down beside Maya's bed. The promise he'd made to the Parkers still lingered in his thoughts, mingling with the faint hope he dared to hold on to. It wasn't just about the logistics job or the offer to help with Maya's treatments. It was the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by struggle and fear. For the first time in years, it felt like he could breathe. Maya stirred, her dark curls spilling across the pillow as her eyes fluttered open. Her small face lit up when she saw him. Daddy, she said, her voice still thick with sleep but warm with affection. Leon smiled, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. Hey, Peanut, how are you feeling? Better, she said with a little shrug. The nurse said I was really brave today. She gave me a sticker. Brave, huh? Leon said, raising an eyebrow. Well, you're always brave in my book. Maya giggled softly, then reached for the notebook on her bedside table. I drew something while you were gone. Do you want to see? Of course, Leon said, sitting back as she flipped through the pages. The notebook was filled with crayon sketches, flowers, animals, and a picture of the two of them holding hands under a bright sun. But it was the newest drawing that caught his attention. It was a picture of a man with a cape, standing tall and holding a shield. Beside him was a small girl with curly hair smiling up at him. Above them, in big, colorful letters, she had written, My Hero. Leon swallowed hard, his chest tightening. Is this me? He asked, his voice soft. Maya nodded eagerly. You saved that boy, Daddy, and you always take care of me. That makes you a hero. Leon chuckled, though his voice was thick with emotion. Well, if I'm a hero, it's only because I have the best sidekick. Maya grinned, her dimples deepening. Sidekicks are just as important, you know. They shared a laugh, and for a moment the sterile hospital room felt lighter, almost warm. Leon leaned back in his chair, watching her flip through the notebook. She paused at a drawing of a park, her face growing wistful. Do you think we'll ever go to the park again? She asked quietly. Like we used to? Leon's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it. Of course we will, he said, his tone firm. As soon as you're feeling better, we'll go to the park every day if you want. Every day? Maya's eyes widened in mock surprise. Every single day, Leon promised, holding out his pinky. She locked hers with his, their old ritual bringing a spark of joy to her tired eyes. Okay, Maya said, her voice soft but hopeful. I can't wait. As the afternoon wore on, they fell into their usual routine, reading, drawing, and sharing stories. Maya told him about the adventure she imagined for her favorite stuffed animal, a worn but beloved teddy bear named Buttons. Leon listened intently, letting her voice wash over him like a balm. Her stories were filled with knights, dragons, and magical lands, each one a reflection of the boundless creativity she somehow held on to despite everything she'd endured. But beneath the light-hearted chatter, Leon couldn't ignore the reality. Maya's treatments were working, but the road ahead was still long. The bills continued to pile up, and every phone call from the hospital sent a ripple of anxiety through him. The Parkers' offer had been a lifeline, but even with their help, he knew the fight wasn't over. That evening, as Maya drifted off to sleep, Leon stayed by her side, his hand resting gently on hers. He studied her face, taking in the delicate curve of her cheek and the faint freckles that dotted her nose. She was so small, so fragile, and yet her spirit shone brighter than anyone he'd ever known. You're the real hero, he whispered, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. You're the strongest person I know. Maya murmured something in her sleep, her lips curving into a faint smile. Leon leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall. The promise he'd made to her, of parks and sunny days, was one he intended to keep, no matter what it took. As the room settled into silence, Leon's thoughts drifted to the black SUV he'd noticed outside the hospital earlier. It had been parked there for hours, its dark windows giving away nothing. He told himself it was just a coincidence, but a faint unease lingered. His world was shifting, and while hope had found its way in, so had uncertainty. Leon's thoughts kept circling back to the black SUV. He had noticed it first in the parking lot at the hospital, idling in the same spot for hours. When he left late that night, it was gone, and he convinced himself it was nothing, just someone waiting for a loved one, like so many others. But now, as he stepped out of the apartment building the next morning, there it was again, parked across the street, its dark windows impenetrable. Leon tightened his grip on his backpack strap, the unease from the previous night settling into his chest. Was it paranoia, or was something truly off? The events of the alley flashed back in his mind. Noah's cries, the cold eyes of the men dragging him, and the screech of their van as they fled. Those men hadn't been petty criminals. They had a purpose, and they had a plan. Forcing himself to move, Leon walked toward the bus stop, keeping the SUV in his peripheral vision. It didn't follow, but the weight of its presence lingered. As he waited for the bus, he tapped out a quick text to Officer Morales, whose number he had saved after the incident at the station. Morning. Spotted a black SUV parked by my place. Could just be my imagination, but thought you should know. The reply came quickly. Stay alert. Don't engage. I'll run the plates if you get the number. Leon exhaled, his nerves steadying a fraction. Morales had been the one person who took him seriously after the kidnapping attempt. If anyone could help, it was her. The bus ride to work was uneventful, though Leon's thoughts were anything but calm. When he arrived at Parker Logistics, the hum of productivity greeted him. The warehouse was a far cry from his old job, a cleaner, more organized space where his efforts felt valued. Elliot Parker had introduced him to the team personally, and Leon had quickly learned the ropes, proving himself to be a reliable addition. Still, today felt different. The shadow of that SUV clung to him, and he found himself scanning the parking lot every chance he got. At lunchtime, he stepped outside for some air, only to freeze mid-step. Across the street, partially hidden behind a row of parked cars, was the same vehicle. Leon's pulse quickened. His mind raced with questions, each one darker than the last. Were the kidnappers watching him? Did they think he knew more than he did? He fumbled for his phone and texted Morales again. It's here, same SUV, across the street from my work. The response came almost instantly. Stay put, I'm sending a patrol unit to check it out. Leon stared at the screen, his jaw tight. He wanted to confront whoever was inside, to demand answers, but he knew Morales was right. This wasn't his fight, not anymore. He had to think about Maya. The patrol car arrived 15 minutes later, its presence deliberate but calm. Two officers approached the SUV, their hands resting near their holsters. Leon watched from the safety of the warehouse doorway as they knocked on the driver's window. Nothing happened at first. Then, the door creaked open, and a man stepped out. Leon's stomach turned as he recognized the scar on the man's cheek. It was him, one of the kidnappers. The officers questioned him briefly, their postures rigid. Then, to Leon's shock, they let him go. The man climbed back into the SUV and drove away as if nothing had happened. Leon's heart pounded as Morales called moments later. He had nothing on him, she explained, frustration clear in her voice. The car is clean. No weapons, no evidence. Without solid proof, we can't hold him. But you know it's him, Leon said, his voice sharp. He's one of the guys who tried to take Noah. We know, Morales replied, her tone firm. But knowing isn't enough. The system doesn't work on instinct, Leon. It works on evidence. Leon's grip on the phone tightened. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait for them to come after me? No, Morales said. You stay vigilant. Let us do our job. If they're watching you, it means they're nervous. That's something we can use. Her words offered little comfort. As Leon ended the call, his thoughts turned to Maya. He couldn't let this danger touch her, not after everything she'd been through. That evening, Leon returned home to find the SUV gone. For now, but the knot in his stomach refused to ease. Sitting at the kitchen table, he stared at the drawing Maya had given him earlier, the one where he wore a cape and held a shield, a hero. That's what she saw in him, and if that's what she needed him to be, then he would be. Leon picked up the phone and called Morales back. If they're watching me, I want to know why. What's my next move? Leon's decision to call Officer Morales marked a turning point. As the days unfolded, she kept in regular contact, offering updates and advice. The black SUV hadn't been seen since the patrol encounter, but Leon knew better than to assume the danger had passed. He moved through his days with caution, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. His protective instincts, already sharpened by Maya's condition, now felt razor-edged. At Parker Logistics, Leon found a strange solace in the routine. The structured tasks and steady rhythm of his new job helped keep his mind focused. Elliot Parker had been true to his word, checking in regularly to ensure Leon was settling in. Leon appreciated the gesture, though he wasn't used to this level of kindness from an employer. It was during one of these check-ins that Elliot invited Leon to lunch. They sat at a small diner a block from the warehouse, their conversation light at first. But as the meal progressed, Elliot leaned in, his tone shifting to something more serious. I can tell you're carrying a lot, Leon, Elliot said, his gaze steady. I don't mean just the work. I see it in how you carry yourself. Leon hesitated, his fork hovering over his plate. It's been a rough couple of years, he admitted. Maya's been through so much, and I'm just trying to hold it all together. Elliot nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know what it's like to feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, but you don't have to do it alone. Leon met his gaze, surprised by the sincerity in Elliot's voice. You've already done more for us than I can ever repay, he said. The job, the help with Maya's treatments. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, Elliot said simply. But I think there's more you're not saying. If those men are still out there, Leon, you're not just protecting your daughter, you're protecting yourself too. Leon exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. They were watching me, he admitted. One of them was parked outside the warehouse. Morales says they're nervous, but all I can think about is how close they might be. Elliot frowned, his brows furrowing. You're not alone in this, Leon. Whatever you need, my family and I are here for you. Don't forget that. The sincerity in Elliot's voice struck a chord, and for the first time in a long while, Leon felt a glimmer of hope. He nodded, his gratitude evident. Thank you, Elliot. That means more than I can say. The conversation left Leon with a sense of renewed purpose. Later that evening, as he sat with Maya in her hospital room, he found himself sharing more of his thoughts with her. Maya, ever perceptive, picked up on his unease. "Is something wrong, Daddy?" she asked, her big brown eyes searching his face. Leon hesitated, then decided to tell her a part of the truth. "There are some people who aren't very nice," he said carefully, "and I'm trying to make sure they don't hurt anyone else." Maya tilted her head, considering his words. "Like you did with Noah?" "Exactly," Leon said with a nod. "Sometimes doing the right thing means facing scary stuff, but we don't face it alone." Maya smiled, her small hand reaching for his. "You're not alone, Daddy. I'm here too." Her words filled Leon with a strength he hadn't realized he needed. As he held her hand, he thought about what Elliot had said, about not carrying the burden alone. The bridges he was building, both with the Parkers and with Morales, were more than just connections. They were lifelines. That night, Leon made another call to Morales. "I want to know what I can do to help," he told her. "If they're watching me, maybe I can turn that into something useful." Morales' voice was firm but cautious. "We'll talk. But remember, Leon, you don't have to carry this on your own." As he ended the call, Leon glanced at Maya, who had fallen asleep with her notebook clutched to her chest. He knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but for her, and for the bridges he was building, it was a fight worth taking. Leon's late-night call to Morales set a new course in the tangled web of his life. She had listened carefully, her tone cautious yet encouraging. If the traffickers were watching him, it could be a double-edged sword, a risk but also an opportunity. Leon agreed to keep her informed of anything suspicious and to be vigilant. Despite the danger, he felt a strange sense of resolve. If it meant keeping Maya and others safe, he would face whatever came his way. Days passed without a sign of the black SUV. Leon began to think they'd backed off, perhaps spooked by the police presence. But the unease never fully left him. It lingered at the edges of his thoughts, a shadow he couldn't quite shake. His routine became sharper, his instincts more finely tuned. He picked Maya up from the hospital after each treatment and spent his evenings with her, cherishing every moment while keeping his guard up. One evening, as Leon walked Maya into their apartment building, he spotted a man lingering near the entrance. The man wore a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured. Leon's body tensed, his hand tightening around Maya's. She looked up at him, sensing his unease. "Daddy?" she whispered. "It's okay," Leon said softly, leading her inside without looking back. But as they climbed the stairs, his pulse quickened. He couldn't ignore the feeling that they were being watched. Once Maya was settled with her sketchbook, Leon stepped onto the balcony, peering down at the street. The man was gone, but his presence had left an impression. Leon immediately texted Morales, "Saw someone hanging around the building tonight. Looked out of place. Could be nothing, but I've got a bad feeling." Her reply was swift. "I'll send someone by to check the area. Stay alert." The tension followed Leon into the next day. As he walked to the bus stop, his eyes darted to every parked car, every figure that lingered too long. At work, he confided in Elliot, who listened intently. "If they're targeting you," Elliot said, his voice grave, "then we need to be proactive. I'll make sure security is beefed up around here. And Leon, don't hesitate to ask for help." "Thanks," Leon replied, the weight of Elliot's support easing some of his worry. That evening, as Leon and Maya returned home, a piece of paper was taped to their apartment door. He pulled it down, his heart sinking as he read the single sentence scrawled across it. "You're in over your head." Leon's hand tightened into a fist. The threat was clear, but it only steeled his resolve. He couldn't afford to show fear. Not to these men, and certainly not to Maya. Tucking the note into his pocket, he entered the apartment, his mind racing. After Maya fell asleep, he called Morales again. "They're escalating," he said, his voice low. "They left a message on my door." "Do you still have it?" Morales asked, her tone sharp. "Yeah," Leon replied. "I'll bring it to you tomorrow." "Good. Leon, listen to me," she said, her voice firm but calm. "These people don't want a spotlight on them. The fact that they're trying to intimidate you means they're feeling pressure. That's a good thing." "It doesn't feel like a good thing," Leon muttered. "I know," Morales admitted, "but we're closing in. Just hang tight and stay vigilant." The following day, Leon handed over the note to Morales, who promised to analyze it for fingerprints or other clues. But as the hours turned into days, the silence grew louder. The traffickers seemed to vanish, leaving Leon in a constant state of tension. He checked his surroundings relentlessly, his heart pounding at every shadow and unfamiliar face. Then, late one night, the call came. "It's Morales," she said, her tone clipped. "We've got intel on a potential meeting location for the traffickers. It's risky, but if you're willing, we could use your help." Leon hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of Maya, of the promise he'd made to keep her safe, but he also thought of Noah and the countless others these men could harm. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady. Morales outlined the plan. Leon would act as bait, drawing out the traffickers while undercover officers closed in. It was dangerous, but Leon didn't flinch. The next evening, Leon walked into the designated spot, a dimly lit parking lot on the outskirts of the city. His heart pounded as he scanned the area, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he held his ground. If this was the price of protecting others, he was willing to pay it. A black van pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The doors opened and two men stepped out. Leon recognized them instantly, the scarred man and his stocky accomplice. They moved toward him, their expressions cold and calculating. "Leon Hayes," the scarred man said, his voice low and menacing. "You should have stayed out of this." Leon's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. "You made it my business when you tried to take that kid." Before the men could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed as police vehicles surrounded the lot. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. The traffickers froze, their escape routes cut off. Morales stepped forward, her gun trained on the men. "It's over," she said firmly. "Hands where I can see them." Leon exhaled, relief flooding through him as the officers took the men into custody. It wasn't just over for him. It was over for Noah, for Maya, and for anyone else who had been in these men's crosshairs. As Morales approached, she placed a hand on Leon's shoulder. "You did good," she said. "Real good." Leon nodded, his heart finally beginning to steady. He had faced the trap and come out stronger, not just for himself, but for everyone he cared about. The sirens faded into the distance as the black van was towed away, carrying the traffickers who had cast a long shadow over Leon's life. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to take a deep breath. Morales gave him a small nod, the weight of the moment evident in her eyes. "You're a brave man, Leon," she said, her tone sincere. "You've done something not many would have the courage to do." Leon didn't feel brave. As the adrenaline began to wear off, he was left with the raw reality of what had just happened. He had willingly stepped into the lion's den, and while the traffickers were now in custody, the danger still felt close. His first thought was of Maya, her safety, her future. "That's all well and good," he said, his voice low. "But is this really over? Are they going to stay behind bars?" Morales sighed, gesturing for Leon to walk with her toward her patrol car. "We've got them on multiple charges, including attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to traffic minors. The evidence we've gathered, combined with your testimony, makes for a strong case, but nothing's ever guaranteed." Leon clenched his jaw. The thought of these men slipping through the cracks was unbearable. "They can't walk free," he said firmly. "Not after what they've done." "They won't," Morales said, her tone resolute. "You've done your part, Leon. Now it's up to the system." As Morales drove him home, the weight of her words lingered. Leon wanted to believe her, to trust that justice would prevail, but a part of him knew how fragile that trust could be. He had seen too much to assume the best. When they arrived at his apartment, Leon thanked Morales quietly and stepped out of the car. The building was dark and silent, the hour late. He climbed the stairs, pausing outside his door. The faint sound of Maya's favorite lullaby drifted through the wood, and he realized Rachel Parker had stayed late to watch her. A rare smile tugged at his lips. He owed the Parkers more than he could ever repay. Inside, Rachel looked up from her seat on the couch. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice soft. Leon hesitated, glancing toward Maya's room. "It's done. They're in custody." Rachel's shoulders sagged in relief. "That's good, really good." She stood, smoothing the creases in her sweater. "Maya was an angel tonight. She's asleep now." Leon nodded, walking her to the door. Thank you for staying. I don't know what I'd do without you and Elliot. Rachel smiled warmly. You'll never have to find out. We're here, Leon, always. After she left, Leon sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The events of the night played on a loop in his mind. Every decision, every step had led to this moment, and while the immediate threat was gone, the scars it left behind felt permanent. The next morning, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Leon dropped Maya off for her treatment, her bright smile a stark contrast to the turmoil he felt inside. She didn't know about the traffickers or the danger he had faced to protect her. All she knew was that her daddy was her hero. At Parker Logistics, Elliot met him with a firm handshake. I heard the news, Elliot said, his voice steady. You stood up to them, Leon. That's something to be proud of. Proud, Leon echoed, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. I'm just glad it's over. Elliot studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, but it matters. You made a difference. Leon nodded, the weight of Elliot's words sinking in. That evening, he returned to the hospital with a gift for Maya, a small golden pin shaped like a star. What's this? She asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. It's for you, Leon said, pinning it to her shirt, because you're my hero too. Maya beamed, her laughter filling the room like sunlight, and for the first time in weeks, Leon felt something close to peace. The golden star pin on Maya's shirt glinted in the afternoon sun as she played with her crayons in the hospital room. For Leon, her happiness was a reminder of why he had fought so hard. But the fight wasn't over. The traffickers were in custody, but justice was far from guaranteed. Morales had called earlier that morning, asking if he'd be willing to testify at the upcoming preliminary hearing. The idea of facing those men in court tightened his chest, but he knew he couldn't back down now. Leon spent the next few days preparing for the hearing. Morales walked him through the process, her steady guidance helping to calm his nerves. You just tell the truth, she said. That's all you need to do. You've already done the hard part. But as the hearing approached, Leon's anxiety grew. He had replayed the events in the alley countless times, the details etched into his memory. Yet the thought of recounting them in a courtroom with the traffickers watching was a different kind of trial. The day of the hearing, Leon dressed in his best shirt and slacks, his hands trembling as he buttoned the cuffs. Maya noticed his unease and reached out to hold his hand. You'll be great, Daddy, she said with a confidence that belied her years. You're the bravest person I know. Her words steadied him, and as he walked into the courthouse, he carried her belief in him like a shield. Inside, the courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos of the alley. The polished wood benches, the quiet murmur of voices, the stern gaze of the judge, all of it felt heavy with formality. Leon's eyes swept the room until they landed on the two men sitting at the defense table. The scarred man met his gaze with a cold smirk, while his stocky accomplice stared blankly ahead. Leon's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to breathe. Morales had warned him not to let them rattle him. They want you to be scared, she had said. Don't give them that power. When it was his turn to testify, Leon stepped up to the witness stand, his palms sweating. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Veronica Chang, guided him through his testimony. He recounted the events of that day, the cries for help, the confrontation in the alley, the van screeching away. His voice was steady, but the weight of those moments pressed on him with every word. As he spoke, he noticed the trafficker's attorney scribbling notes, occasionally whispering to his clients. The scarred man smirked again, his confidence unnerving. But Leon kept his focus on Veronica and the judge, determined not to let them intimidate him. When the defense attorney began cross-examining him, the questions were sharp, designed to sow doubt. You didn't see the men physically harm the child, correct? The attorney asked, his tone calculated. No, Leon admitted. But they were dragging him toward a van. He was crying, begging them to let him go. That's not normal. The attorney smirked, pressing further. And you decided to intervene without calling the police first. Would you say that was a rational decision? Leon's jaw tightened. There wasn't time to call anyone. If I hadn't stepped in, who knows what would have happened to that boy." The attorney nodded, as if satisfied with Leon's response, and moved on. But Leon could feel the tension in the room shift. He had said what mattered. He had acted to save a life. When the hearing concluded, Morales met him outside the courtroom. "You did good in there," she said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "The judge denied bail. They're staying locked up until the trial." Leon exhaled, relief washing over him. "Does that mean we've won?" "It means we've taken a big step forward," Morales said. "But there's still a long road ahead." As Leon left the courthouse, he thought about what that road might hold. The traffickers would fight back, their defense team throwing every tactic they could to avoid justice. But Leon was ready. He wasn't just fighting for Noah or for the countless other children these men had targeted. He was fighting for Maya, for her safety, and for the world he wanted her to grow up in. That evening, as Leon sat by Maya's bedside, she handed him a new drawing. It was of the two of them standing on a hill, holding hands under a bright sky. "That's us," she explained. "And that's the sun, because you make everything brighter." Leon's throat tightened, and he pulled her into a gentle hug. "You're my light, Maya," he whispered, "and I'll do everything to keep you safe." For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of closure. The traffickers were behind bars, and while the battle wasn't over, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Maya, Morales, and the Parkers had given him strength, and with them by his side, he felt ready for whatever came next. The courthouse victory had given Leon a moment to breathe, but his true battle was far from over. His thoughts always circled back to Maya, who had spent the last few months bravely enduring her treatments. Her strength inspired him daily, but he could see the toll it had taken. Every time she smiled through her exhaustion, Leon was reminded of how much she had already overcome and how much more lay ahead. One evening, as Leon returned to the hospital after work, he noticed something different in Maya's demeanor. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks, a faint blush on her cheeks. The nurse stood by her, holding a clipboard and beaming. "What's going on?" Leon asked, setting his bag down and moving to Maya's side. The nurse smiled. "Maya's latest test results came back," she said. "Her response to treatment has been remarkable. If her progress continues, she might be eligible for discharge soon." Leon's breath caught. "Discharge?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean she could go home?" "That's what we're hoping," the nurse replied. "The doctors want to monitor her a little longer, but things are looking very promising." Leon turned to Maya, who was grinning from ear to ear. "Did you hear that, Peanut?" he said, his voice breaking. "You might be coming home." Maya nodded excitedly. "Does that mean I can sleep in my own bed again? And we can go to the park?" Leon laughed, brushing her curls back from her face. "That's exactly what it means." The news brought a renewed sense of hope, and over the next few days, Maya's energy seemed to grow with each passing hour. Leon spent every free moment with her, bringing her favorite snacks and reading her the stories she loved. Her laughter, once faint and rare, now filled the room like music. But even as joy returned, Leon couldn't ignore the challenges that lay ahead. The prospect of Maya coming home brought new worries, financial strains, her ongoing care, and the lingering fear of the traffickers. He shared these concerns with Rachel and Elliot Parker during one of their visits. "You've already done so much for us," Leon admitted, his voice thick with gratitude. "But I'm worried about what comes next. I want to give Maya the life she deserves, but it feels like climbing a mountain." Rachel placed a hand on his arm. "Leon, you're not alone in this. You have us, and you have Morales. We'll help you navigate this step by step." Elliot nodded. "You've got a lot of people in your corner. Maya's future is worth every bit of effort, and we'll make sure you both have what you need." Their words brought Leon a sense of reassurance he hadn't felt in years. For once, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. 2 weeks later, the day Leon had been waiting for finally arrived. He stood in Maya's hospital room, helping her pack her belongings into a small bag. Her favorite stuffed bear, her crayons, and her notebook, all the things that had brought her comfort during her stay, were carefully tucked inside. As they prepared to leave, Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, are we really going home?" Leon knelt beside her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "We are," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And it's not just a home. It's a new beginning." The drive back to their apartment was filled with Maya's chatter about all the things she wanted to do now that she was feeling better. When they arrived, Leon carried her inside, her small hand clutching his tightly. Her face lit up as she saw her room, which Leon had decorated with bright colors and posters of her favorite characters. "It's perfect," Maya whispered, running to her bed and hugging her stuffed bear tightly. Leon stood in the doorway, watching her with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time in months, life felt normal again. As Maya explored her room, Leon made a silent vow to himself. He would do everything in his power to protect her happiness, no matter what challenges lay ahead. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, Maya leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Daddy," she said softly. Leon kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "I love you too, Peanut. Always." In that moment, he knew they had turned a corner. The road ahead might still be steep, but they were walking it together. And for Leon, that was all that mattered. The glow of Maya's return home still lingered as Leon settled into their new rhythm. Every day felt like a gift. Maya's laughter rang through the apartment as she rediscovered the joys of simple things: cooking breakfast with her dad, painting rainbows in her sketchbook, and reading stories together on the couch. The heaviness that had weighed on Leon's shoulders for so long began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. Elliot and Rachel Parker had been instrumental in this transformation. They visited often, bringing meals and surprises for Maya. It was Rachel's idea to throw a celebration, a small gathering to honor Maya's strength and mark a new chapter for the Hayes family. At first, Leon was hesitant. A party seemed too extravagant, too bold for someone who had been living day to day for so long. But Rachel insisted. "This isn't just about Maya," she said. "It's about you too, Leon. You've come so far, and you both deserve this." Leon eventually agreed, and over the next week, plans began to take shape. The Parkers offered their spacious backyard for the occasion, and Morales promised to swing by if her schedule allowed. Word spread among the Parker Global employees, many of whom had come to respect Leon's quiet resilience. Before long, the simple gathering had turned into a full-fledged celebration. On the morning of the party, Leon and Maya arrived at the Parker residence to find the backyard transformed. Balloons in every color of the rainbow adorned the fence, and tables were draped in bright tablecloths, each topped with cheerful arrangements of sunflowers and daisies. A banner stretched across the patio, reading, "Maya's New Beginning." Maya's eyes widened in delight. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed, tugging at Leon's hand. "It's so pretty." "It sure is," Leon said, his throat tightening at the sight. He looked over at Rachel, who stood nearby, her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "We wanted to," Rachel replied. "Today is about celebrating everything you've both overcome." Guests began arriving soon after, each one bringing warmth and well wishes. Maya basked in the attention, her energy contagious as she flitted from one activity to the next. There was face painting, a small craft table, and even a bounce house that had her giggling uncontrollably. Leon watched her with a mix of pride and awe, grateful for every smile and laugh. At one point, Elliot approached Leon with a drink in hand. "She's thriving," he said, nodding toward Maya. "You should be proud." "I am," Leon replied, his voice steady. "But I couldn't have done it without all of you and Rachel. Morales, everyone." Elliot clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did the hardest part, Leon. You showed up every single day. That's what makes the difference." As the afternoon turned into evening, the celebration reached its peak. A small stage had been set up, and Rachel stepped up to the microphone, calling for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice warm. "This gathering is more than just a party. It's a testament to the strength of this incredible little girl and her equally incredible father." The crowd cheered as Maya blushed, hiding her face behind her hands. Leon smiled, feeling a rare sense of ease. Rachel continued, Maya, you've shown all of us what it means to be brave. And Leon, you've reminded us of the power of resilience and love. This community is better because of both of you. When Rachel stepped down, the applause was deafening. Leon lifted Maya into his arms, holding her close as she giggled. "What do you think, Peanut?" he asked. "Pretty cool, huh?" "It's the best day ever," Maya said, her grin as bright as the setting sun. The night ended with a fireworks display, each burst lighting up the sky and reflecting in Maya's wide eyes. She leaned her head against Leon's shoulder, her voice soft as she whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." Leon kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "No, Maya, thank you. You're the reason for everything." As the final fireworks faded, Leon looked around at the faces of those who had become more than friends. They were family. He realized that the celebration wasn't just about survival. It was about the life they had reclaimed and the hope that lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, Leon allowed himself to believe in a future filled with possibility. The fireworks faded, but the warmth of the celebration lingered in Leon's heart. The days that followed were filled with moments of peace that felt almost foreign to him. Maya's health continued to improve, her laughter now a daily rhythm in their small apartment. For the first time in years, Leon began to allow himself to dream, not just for her future, but for his own. The trial for the traffickers loomed, a reminder that the battle wasn't fully behind them. Leon knew his testimony would be critical. Morales had reassured him that the evidence was solid, but the weight of responsibility pressed on him. He wanted to ensure that justice was served, not just for Noah, but for all the children these men had targeted. One evening, as Leon sat at the kitchen table reviewing the notes Morales had given him, Maya wandered in, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She climbed onto the chair next to him, her eyes curious. "Are you studying, Daddy?" she asked, tilting her head. "In a way," Leon said, closing the file and turning his attention to her. "I'm getting ready for the trial." Maya's brow furrowed. "Are those bad men going to be there?" "They will," Leon admitted, his voice steady. "But I'm not afraid of them." Maya nodded solemnly, her small hand resting on his. "You're not afraid because you're a hero." Leon smiled, her words both humbling and uplifting. "Maybe, but mostly I'm not afraid because I know why I'm doing this. For you and for other kids like you." Maya's face brightened and she opened her sketchbook, revealing a new drawing. It showed the two of them standing on a mountaintop, a bright sun shining above them. "This is us," she explained, "because no matter what, we keep climbing." Leon's chest tightened, pride and love swelling within him. "That's exactly right, Peanut. We keep climbing." The next day, Leon visited Morales at the precinct to go over the trial details. She greeted him with her usual no-nonsense demeanor, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You've come a long way, Leon," she said as she handed him a folder. "Most people would have stopped after saving Noah. You didn't just step up. You stayed in the fight." Leon shrugged, flipping through the papers. "It wasn't a choice. Not really. It's just what needed to be done." "That's what makes you different," Morales said, her tone thoughtful. "And it's why we're going to win this." Leon nodded, her confidence bolstering his own. "Let's hope the jury sees it the same way." As the trial drew closer, Leon found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. His quiet life had been upended by a single moment of courage, setting off a chain of events he could never have anticipated. The weight of it all could have crushed him, but instead, it had forged him into something stronger. One evening, as he tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Do you think the bad men will go away forever?" she asked softly. Leon hesitated, stroking her hair. "I think they will," he said, "because people like Officer Morales and Mr. Parker believe in doing what's right. And so do I." Maya smiled, her trust in him absolute. "You always do what's right, Daddy. That's why you're my hero." As she drifted off to sleep, Leon sat by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest. He thought about the challenges still ahead, the trial, the lingering fear, the mountain of responsibilities. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them. The quiet resolve that had carried him this far was now unshakable. He had built a new life for himself and Maya, brick by brick, with the help of those who believed in him. And no matter what the future held, he knew one thing for certain. He would never stop fighting for the life they deserved.